If you're serious about getting hired as a backend or full stack developer or building your own real applications, you cannot skip authentication, because anybody can build a simple to-do list application, but employers, and the same as real products, are about one very simple question. Can you actually handle users? Can you securely store their data, securely retrieve that data, and securely populate data on your front end? So we are going to be seeing that today in this tutorial. Today, I'll be showing you the very simplest and cleanest JWT setup. We are going to be using Express MongoDB for our database. We will allow users to register, log in, and we are also going to have a very simple middleware, and we will have our protected route that a user can access only after they have logged in. And by the end of this, you have a backend ready that you can plug into any project. So whether it's an e-commerce project, a social media app, a SaaS application, anything, because the structure is basically the same. So you don't need extensive experience for this tutorial, as I'm going to be explaining everything step by step. So most of the concepts that I'm going to be using throughout this tutorial, I'll be taking brief breaks to explain everything, so you don't only understand the how, but you understand the why. Because it's very important as you're learning and as you're building your own things that you understand why things happen and not only how things happen. So buckle up, take a pen and a paper so you can write down notes when I'm explaining things, so you can actually understand why things work and why things are used the way they are. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, now I'm going to walk you through how to build this API. And there are going to be several endpoints that we are going to build throughout. And this endpoint will basically allow a user to create their account, log into their account, and also access the protected route that is only allowed when they have logged in or created their account. So we are going to go step by step throughout this video, and I'm going to be doing my best to explain everything so you can understand how things work, not only copy code. So if you have a paper and a pen, take notes throughout so you don't only copy code, but you understand what we are doing. So the very first thing you're going to do is to open VS Code or Cursor or whatever code editor you're using. Right now, I am using VS Code and I don't have any code completion added here. I'm just using plain old VS Code. So the first thing we are going to do is to open our terminal. So I am using a Mac. I just need to go up here and click on terminal. I'll go to my desktop. So I'll say cd desktop. So if you want, you can create it on whatever folder you want, but I prefer creating it directly on the desktop since it's easy to find. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a folder. I'll type mkdir and then the name of the folder, I'll call it JWT just for easy naming purposes. So when I press enter, okay, it's mkdir, not mkld. So JWT auth. And then next, I'm going to say cd JWT auth. And then now I'm going to say code and dot. So if it's that you type this code dot and it doesn't open the code editor for you, then you don't have the extension installed. In order to install the extension, you're going to hold down Command Shift and P, or Control Shift and P if you're on Windows, and then just type in code dot. You will see the first command that says shell command install code command in path, and then you click on it. But I already have it installed, so I'll just type code dot, and you go ahead and open a brand new code editor for me. So right now I am inside my project folder. Let me just go ahead and zoom in so you can see clearly. So the next thing we are going to do now is to initialize our packages. And we are going to do this by first opening our terminal. So we are going to say here new terminal, and then here we'll say npm init and then y. Then this is going to create a package.json file right here. Then the next thing we're going to do is to install the necessary libraries that we're going to use. So first we'll install Express. Then we're going to install Mongoose, because Mongoose is basically the thing that is going to allow us to interface between our code base and our MongoDB backend. So here we're going to also install bcrypt so we can be able to hash our passwords. And then we also install JSON Web Token, and then .env, and finally Morgan. So we'll wait for it to install. And now after it has installed, you're going to see a node modules folder created along with the package log.json. And then next we're going to install nodemon. This is going to have npm i d nodemon. So make sure to type exactly as I've typed it. And this nodemon library basically restarts our server anytime we change a piece of code in our project. So we're going to install it right now. And this -d that I've entered right here is just so that it can always stay only in the development environment. So the next thing we're going to do is to head over to our package.json, because once we have installed these things and we will write our first line of code or our first file, we need to tell our project, or we need to tell npm where to load the project from. So when we want to run the project, it loads it from a specific file. So here in the script, you're going to add dev, and then here we're going to say nodemon source, because we're going to be creating a source folder in a bit, and then here we're going to say server.js. Okay, awesome. Now the next thing we're going to do, since we have already set up the basic parts of our project, we are going to go ahead and create the different necessary folders. So the first folder we're going to have to create here is the source folder, and inside the source folder we'll create our models folder, which is basically going to be for our schemas or our data schema models. And then next we're going to create a different folder called route. As the name suggests, this is going to be for our routes, like the register route, the login route. And then next we're going to have our middleware. So this is basically what is going to take care of things like auth and protected routes. Okay, no, the middleware is basically what is going to take care of the things like auth. So the next thing we're going to do is to create our different files. So the first file we're going to create is our server.js file, and make sure to create it inside your source folder. So once your source folder is selected as here, click on this icon right here to create the file, and then type server.js. And then next we are going to create our .env file. The .env file is going to be outside of the source folder. So you can come here and click anywhere right here. So you can deselect your source folder, and then you click here to create a file right here. And then you can have .env. And this .env is a very important file, as the things you don't basically want to commit and let the whole internet have access to it are going to be entered here. For example, your port number, your unique database connection URL, and so on. So anything that is sensitive, like your API keys, things like that, all of these are to be entered inside your .env folder. Sorry, that are to be entered inside your .env file. So take note of that. So the next file we're going to be creating here is our db file, which is going to contain the connection to our MongoDB, which is going to contain the connection to our MongoDB backend. So it's going to be db.js. And then now we're going to create the different files inside our different folders that we just created right here. So inside models, we're going to have user.js, which will basically contain the schema for our data or our user data. And then here we're going to have auth, which is going to be auth.js. And then next we're going to have our next route, which is going to be user.js. And this user.js route will basically be our protected route. So the route that the user will be allowed to access after they have logged in. And inside our middleware right now, we're going to have auth.js. Okay, so we are all set with the folder creation. Now the next thing we're going to have to do is to set up our MongoDB backend or our MongoDB database. So to use this, we are going to use MongoDB Atlas, but you can use MongoDB Compass if you want to have it directly on your desktop. But just for simplicity, we are going to use MongoDB Atlas. So we are going to minimize VS Code like this, and then we're going to open Google Chrome. I'm going to open a new browser in Google Chrome. Then we're going to type MongoDB. Even if you do a typo, it's still going to come up correctly. And then you can click on Get Started, and then you can sign in. So I'm just going to go ahead and log into my account. So once you're inside your account, this is basically what you're going to see. So let me just zoom in a little bit more so you can see. So the first thing you're going to do is to create a new project. So I already had a new project that I created before this, but I'll go ahead and create a new project. So I can come here to view all projects. We're going to say new project. I'll name it JWT auth2. You can name it whatever you want, and then we click on next. And then if you want to invite somebody to your project, you're free to do so, but I don't need to, so I'll click on create project. And yeah, we have our project created. And then the next thing we're going to have to do is to create a cluster. So we just come here and click create cluster. And then you can start with the free plan, because everything we're going to be using here is absolutely in the free plan. And then you can leave everything as default here and click on create deployment. Then after you've clicked on create deployment, what you need to do is to create a new database user. So you don't need to copy this, but if you want to copy it, it's totally fine. So you come here and click on create database user. And once you've clicked on create database user, you can now go to the next step, which is to choose a connection method. So the method that is relevant to us right now is this one right here. So we click on drivers. And then next, you can leave everything as default. The driver is NodeJs. We can install this driver. Okay, and the next very most important thing right here is to copy this link right here, because this link is going to allow us to connect to this our database that we just created. So once you copy this link here, let's just do it right now. We're going to copy this link, and then we're going to come to our project, to the .env file, and then we're going to copy and paste it here. I'm going to show you what to do with it in a minute, but for now, make sure it's copied. And inside your URL right here, make sure this is there. So this is basically the username and the password and your cluster name. So make sure this is correct. It should normally be filled by default, so you don't need to worry about it, but this is just something to take note of in case you're working on a different MongoDB project and you have a problem with the connection. Always remember there is the username here, and then there is a password, and then there is a cluster name. Okay. All right, so let's move over to the next step. So the next step, in order for us to be able to access our database from anywhere right now, we are going to go to network. So we go to database and network access, and then we go to IP access list. We are going to allow anybody over the internet to be able to access this. This is not recommended for security purposes, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, so you can actually access your database easily without having to look for your PC's IP address, we are going to enter this. And this is basically saying that anywhere, anybody everywhere can enter or can access your database. So we're going to click on confirm. It's going to take some time to deploy the changes, just like a minute, and then you can come back to it. So while it's deploying, let's go to the next step. So the next thing we're going to do here is to come to our .env file. So let me maximize VS Code here. We're going to come to our .env file. Now we're going to enter our port number. So port here, we're going to put on 5050. So you can put any port number, just make sure for it to be 4 digits so it can be easy to access. And make sure no other program is running on this port. Okay, and then next, since we entered our MongoDB URL here, we are going to come here in all caps. We're going to say Mongo _ URI equals this. Okay, so we'll be able to access it anywhere in our project safely. And then next, we are going to add our JWT secret. So this is going to be JWT _ secret. I'll just type anything here, ATO _ secret key. Okay, so this can be anything, but just make sure that your secret key is not available publicly on the internet. So always make sure your secret key is inside your .env file and you don't upload it anywhere to GitHub. So right here, we're going to have our expiration date of our secret key. So we're going to say JWT expires _ in equals to 7D, which is basically stands for 7 days. So this secret key can be like a very random character, a longer character for you to be more secure, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just keeping it extra simple. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is to go to our db.js file. So let me just go ahead and close this terminal for now. Or you know what, let me leave this terminal, but let me minimize it because we'll be using it in a second. We'll go to our db.js file, and then now we have to create the database connector. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is to initialize Mongoose. And Mongoose is basically a tool that helps your Node or Express app talk to MongoDB easily. So it's basically like an interface between your source code or your code base and your database. So here we're going to say const mongoose equals to require mongoose. And then next, we're going to create an asynchronous function and call it connectDB and pass as parameter the URI. And then here we're going to say if URI doesn't exist, then we want to throw a new error. So here we're going to say throw error, then we're going to give it a nice message so it can be easily recognizable. So we're going to say Mongo URI missing in .env. And then next we're going to say await mongoose .connect URI. And then finally we're going to log to our database console.log MongoDB connected. Okay, so we can make sure to tell the person or whoever is working with our API that we're actually connected. So next we can export this. So we're going to say module.export equals connectDB. So we can be able to use it in another file. Next, we're going to head over to our server.js. And inside the server.js, this is basically where our backend is going to be booting up from. So everything that we're going to build out throughout, we'll always have to make sure to come and call it in a certain way inside the server.js file. So here, the first thing we're going to do is to require, we're going to require .env, because this .env will basically help us to access all these our keys right here inside our project. So here we're going to say require .env, and then here we're going to say config. And then now just below here we'll initialize express. So we'll say const express require express. Next, we're going to initialize Morgan. And then we're going to say require Morgan. So what is the use of Morgan? So Morgan is basically a tool that logs every request your Express service receives. So if we receive a post request, a get request, we are basically logging everything into our terminal so we can see if they are successful or not. It basically just prints just a short line of every single request. So it's very useful when working with any backend service. So here, now next we're going to initialize the connectDB that we just defined in our DB file. So we're going to say require, and we'll be calling the path to our file, or the relative path to our file. Okay, so let me make sure to type it out well. Here we're going to have DB. And then now, next we can initialize our app. So here we're going to say const app equals to express. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to enable JSON parsing by saying app.use express.json. Next, we are going to enable Morgan so we can basically see every request hit our server when it happens. So we're going to say here Morgan and then dev, and dev here is to specialize that this is happening only during development. And then next we are going to create our very first route, which is going to be a very simple route, so that when anybody hits our URL or hits the port that we're going to create, it basically heads over to this route and shows a very simple message. And the message we're going to have here is okay. So let's do it right here. We're going to say res.send and then here okay. So next we're going to be specifying the port. So the port here we're going to say const port equals process.env, because we basically want to get the port from our .env file. So we are basically saying that we want to access this port right here. And now if the port doesn't exist, we want to manually type the port right here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do now is to connect our database or connect our app to our MongoDB database. So we're going to say here connect DB, and inside here we're going to have process.env, and then we're going to call our MongoDB URI, or this URI that we enter right here. So it's going to get it from our process.env. And then after this, we're going to have a .then, so that if we successfully connect to our MongoDB database, we basically want to launch our Express server and start listening to requests. Okay, so inside here, we're going to have app.listen. And then the parameters we're going to pass here is the port, and then the function here. So here we're going to have console.log. Here we're going to say server is running on port, and then we'll use the $sign port, so it should dynamically put in the port here, so we are not hard typing anything by ourselves. So we can close it right here, and after the dot, then we're going to have a .catch statement. In case any error occurs, we want to basically catch the error so it doesn't just crash our whole application. We can basically handle the error gracefully. So here we're going to have a very simple handling here. So if an error occurs, we are just going to log the error. So we're going to say DB connection failed, and then we can say, or we can enter the error message here, and we can exit. Okay, so this is basically the fundamental thing for us to define our basic API and to start our server. So we are going to start a basic test. So we're going to say here npm run dev. Okay, so everything is working fine. We have our MongoDB connected right here. NodeMon is currently running and watching our file, so that if any file changes, it basically restarts and reruns alone. And then we have our server is running on port 5050. And then the next check we are going to do is to ensure that our get URL is working. So we're going to head over to here. We're going to type localhost and then 5050 here. And then we should see OK as we just specified. It means that everything is working fine. We are connected to our MongoDB database, and our Express is currently running. Our Express server is currently running fine. So now let's move over to the next thing. So the next thing we're going to do is to define our schema, which is going to be the user schema. So what fields do the user expect, which fields are required, and in what form. So we're going to define all of that. So right now, heading over to our user.js right here, we are going to say const mongoose, and then here we're going to require mongoose, and then next we're going to say const user schema equals new mongoose dot schema, and then inside here we're going to specify our schema. So the first thing we want to have here is the name. And then inside the name, we want to have type. The type is going to be a string. And then, is the name required? Yes, so we're going to set required as true. And then we're going to set trim here as true. And trim is just so that we can remove any white spaces. Then next, we're going to specify the email. So here, we're going to say the type is going to be string. And next, required still is going to be true. And then here, unique true. And the reason we are putting unique is so that we don't want any other person to have the same email. So if two people try to create the same email, we are going to throw an error like invalid email or the email already exists. I think that one is better. Email already exists. So lowercase, we want every email to be lowercase. So here we're going to say true. And finally here, we're also going to have trim true because we want to basically get rid of any white spaces. And then next, we're going to specify the password field. So here we're going to have type. The type is also going to be a string right here. And then required is going to be true. And then the minimum password length. So we're going to set here min length. Minimum password length is going to be 6. And then select is going to be false. So this select right here, when we add it inside our schema, is just to control whether this field is going to be included when we're going to be returning the data. So when we're returning the data, we want to return the name and the email, but we absolutely do not want to return the password. That is why we set select here as false. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to add a timestamp because we want to know when the user was created and when the user was updated. So here we're going to set it as true because MongoDB is going to take care of automatically generating the timestamp for us. And then next we can now export this right here. So we're going to export mongoose.model And then inside here is going to be user, then user schema. Okay, so we are all set with defining our schema. And then the next thing we're going to do is to create our different routes. So these routes will be what will allow us to create a user's account and also log into a user's account. So we are going to create two routes, which are going to be post routes. One is going to be /register and the other one is going to be /login. As the name suggests, one will be to log in and the other to register an account. So to do this, we'll go to our routes folder inside our auth.js file. Okay, and then inside here, we're going to first start by initializing express. And then here is going to be require express. Next, we're going to have const bcrypt. And then here we're going to require bcrypt.js. It has to be inside here. Okay, we can take this off. And then next, we're going to initialize JWT. And then here is going to be require JSON web token. And then next, we're going to initialize our user, which is basically going to be from the folder we just created or the file we just created right now. So here is going to be models and here user. Okay, so if you're wondering what's the use of bcrypt and JWT right here, or JSON web token, bcrypt is basically used to hash passwords before saving them and then compare a login password with the saved hash. Because you don't want to save your passwords as is, what you want to do is to save a hash version. So nobody, even the people having the MongoDB database, cannot actually access anybody's password. So every single password is hashed. So that is the use of bcrypt. So it's basically an encryption technique to encrypt every single password. And then the JWT is now used to verify and create tokens so that the user can stay authenticated without sending their password every single time. So this JWT is going to create a token after you create an account or after you log in. And now this token can be saved in the session so that anytime a user logs back into the website, the person doesn't need to always put in their email and password. All we need to do is to verify that token to let them to access their account. So once we are going to complete this route and seal everything, we are going to actually test this API so you can see how the token is actually created and what we can theoretically do with it once you want to maybe use it on the front end or do something else with it. Okay, so now let's continue creating this, our auth.js file. So here we're going to initialize our router. So here we're going to have const router equals express dot router, and then next we're going to have function sign token, and this is basically going to be used to create our tokens. So here we're going to have return JWT.sign, and inside here we basically want to create a token just for a specific user. So we have to pass the user ID because the user ID is unique. And then inside here, we want to access our JWT secret. So here we're going to have process.env JWT underscore secret, and then comma, and then we also want to specify when it expires. So here we're going to say expires in. We also want to get it from our process.env, and then here JWT secret underscore in or 7 days. So if we don't have something specified, it defaults to 7 days. So let's ensure that we actually have the correct term here. Okay, so that it's wrong, we have to change it to in, and then into our auth.js. Okay, everything is correct. This has to be secure, so make sure that everything is correct. If not, you're going to have some errors. So here we have JWT secure here and there. Okay, so we're actually having a mistake, so we just want to correct it. Okay, everything is the same. Always ensure that these two are the same, or what you're accessing is actually in your .env, or you start having errors and you may not even know where it's from. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is to actually define our first route. And the first route is going to be the register route. So here we're going to say router.post, and then here we're going to have /register, and then inside here is going to be an asynchronous function, and as parameters we're going to pass the request and we're going to pass here rec and res, so request and resolution or resolve. And then here we're going to have try, and inside this try block now we can start specifying everything. So here we basically want to read data from the request. So here we're going to have all this equals to rec.body or an empty JSON. And the next thing we're going to do is to basically check if all these are existing. So we're going to say if not name, or if not email, or not password. Then we're going to return res.status 400, which is going to be basically an error. So we're going to return this JSON right here to say that here we're going to have message. We'll say name, email, password are required. So if a user wants to basically send the data without either of these, we'll basically send this error message right here so they can know that they have to type all this information. And then the next thing we're going to do is to check if an email is already existing. So if the email that is gotten from this request body is already inside our MongoDB database, we want to say that the email is already existing. So we're going to create a check right here. So we're going to say const await user.find1, and then here the field we are looking for is the email. And then next we're going to have if existing. So if existing is true, we want to return an error. So we're going to return res.status 409, which is the status code. And then the JSON that we're going to be returning, or the message we are going to be returning, is email already in use, to tell the user that, hey, someone else have already taken this email, you better take something else. So we're going to say email already in use. Okay, so this is fine right here. And then the next thing we're going to do is to create our hashed password. Because remember what we said earlier, never store a user's password in your database like that. Always encrypt it. So here we're going to have hash, and then password here, comma 10. And then next we're going to create the user in the database. So we're going to say const user await, and then here we're going to have user.create. Oops, sorry, we have to type equals await. Here we have user.create, and then here we're going to say name, email, and then for the password we are going to use hashed, because remember we can't just save the user's password in the database like that. So we first hash the password, because this is it right here. We are using the bcrypt to hash it, and then now we use this hashed right here that we've created to basically save this hash inside the database. So inside the database, it will basically look like gibberish. Nobody can actually know what it is. But now when you want to log in back to your application, you basically decrypt that password and actually validate the real one. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do now is to create a JWT token. So we're going to have const equals to sign token. Let me make sure. So this is supposed to be token right here with capital T, just for proper naming conventions. So here, sign token, and then this is going to be user dot underscore ID, because this is basically how the ID is specified from our MongoDB database. So this token will basically represent the user that is logged in. Okay. And then next, we want to create a success response if we have successfully created a user. So here we're going to have res.status, and then the status code is 201. And then we're going to have the JSON here. And inside the JSON, we'll have the token. So we basically want to return the token, and then we want to return the user. So here, this user, we want to return the ID. So here we'll have user dot underscore ID. And then we're going to have the name. So we'll have user.name. And then finally, we'll have email. And then we are not returning password, because obviously we don't want to return the password to the front end. We just want to return the name and the email. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do now is to catch any error. So we have our try block here, and then after our try block we have our catch block. And now the catch block here, we're going to have here error, and then inside here we want to basically return an error status code if an error occurs. So here we're going to have status, and then the status code here is going to be 500, and then the message we are going to return here is server error. Okay, so these are very basic error messages, but for the purpose of this tutorial this is absolutely fine and it's going to work for our case. Okay, so we have our first route created, so that is our register route. And then now the next route we want to create is our login route. So how is the user going to do to log into their account? So now we want to create another post route. So here is going to be the login, and then we can create our async function, and then now we have request, resolve, and then here we're going to have our try block. Inside our try block now, same thing, we want to basically get the request body. So here we're going to have password equals to rec.body, rec.body, or we're going to get an empty JSON. Okay, so now we want to check if the email and password exist. So if not email or not password, we spelled it wrongly. Now we're going to return res.status 400, and then the error message here is going to be email and password are required. Okay, and as I said, these are very specific error, these are very generic error messages, so we are just going to say email and password required. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to find the user inside the database. So still within our try block, after our if statement, we're going to say const user equals await user.find1, and inside here now we're going to say email because we're trying to find the user email if it exists, and then here we're going to say .select plus password. The reason we are adding this plus password is that we first specified inside our schema that we shouldn't be able to select our password, but this plus right here allows us to temporarily select the password for verification purposes, so we can verify the login first, and then for any other user or any other case we're not going to be able to select the password. Okay, and then next we're going to say if not user. So if the user doesn't exist, we're going to say return res.status. The status code here is going to be 401, and then here we're going to say .json, and then the message here is going to be invalid credentials. Okay, credentials, let's spell it correctly. Okay, so a very basic error message, that's totally fine. And then now next we're going to check if the hash password retrieved basically matches the password that was entered. So we're going to say here bcrypt.compare password, so basically the password that you enter versus the password from the database. So this is basically just decrypting the password. So it basically compares this very encrypted password that is stored in your database to the decrypt or to the normal version, and this function basically takes care of decrypting everything to make sure it works. So you can't see the decryption process because that's actually a security feature, so it's hidden in the background, and it has to check whether both are the same and basically allows the user to log in or not. So we're going to now say if not okay, then we're going to return res.status, because this okay right here is going to return either true or false. If it is true, then these passwords are equal. If it is false, then they are not equal, meaning that the password you entered is wrong. So we're going to send an error or a error status code of 401 saying that, let's say message here, invalid credentials, or we can say invalid password, but I'll just leave it to invalid credentials just for simplicity purposes. Okay, now the next thing, if all of this passes, we want to now create a new token. So we're going to have token, sign token, equals to user and we pass as parameter user.id. Okay, and then now we can return our proper resolutions. So here we're going to have return res.json, and inside here we want to return the token, and then here we're going to return the user, because remember, we are returning the token so that if the user wants to log into their account or access their account without having to enter their password every single time, all we'll do is to check whether the token is correct instead of them having to enter the email and password every time. So the token will be saved inside the browser session storage so that it's only available while they are on the website. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do here is to catch any error. So here we're going to say catch, and then here return res.status, and then the status code is going to be 500. And then now here we're going to have JSON message. Here is going to be server error. Okay, so now that we have done defining our two routes, our register and our login route, we can now export this. So we are going to have module.export equals router. So we are exporting the router because remember, the router is basically what is allowing us to access these two routes. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to have to do is to create our middleware. So this middleware will basically what will allow us to authenticate our users securely. So what is the middleware here? A middleware is just a function that runs before your route handler. So what can the middleware do? It can basically check something like basically the login, or modify the request and add a request user, or block the request if something is wrong, or allow it to continue by calling next. Okay, so we're going to see this exactly now. So the first thing we're going to do is to initialize JWT. So here we're going to say JWT require, and here we'll have JSON web token, and then next we're going to have our function, and we'll call our function auth, and inside the auth as parameters we'll have rec, res, and then next. And then here we're going to have our try block, and inside our try block we are going to specify the header. So we're going to have the header here. We're going to say const header, and then we're going to have rec headers dot authorization. So this header here is just basically required so that we can get the token from the request header. And when we're going to be testing it in Postman in a second, I'm going to show you exactly how to do this. So here we're going to have, don't forget to add equal sign right here. So we're going to have request header or an empty string. So here, and then next we're going to have const token equals to, because we are basically trying to get the token from the header. So we'll have here header.starts with bearer, and then here we're going to have header.slice 7 or new. And this is just because before the actual token, there is a very specific string that is always entered in a header. So this is basically the format. Let me copy it and paste it here just for display purposes. So once you enter the token, this is basically what is expected. So it expects authorization and then bearer and then the token. That is why when we are trying to extract the token, we are basically getting the header and checking if it starts with bearer, and then we're going to basically slice it from after this last character. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then now we slice it from that character to only get the token. So that is exactly why we are getting this token right here as such. So if nothing exists, we only want to return no. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is to check if the token exists. So we're going to say if not token, we want to return res.status, and then here 401 because it's basically just an error, and then here the message is going to be no token, access denied. Okay, so we want to deny access if no token exists. Okay, so now next we want to verify the token, because after getting the token we have to verify it. So here we're going to say JWT dot verify, and here we're going to come here and parse the token, and then here we're going to come and parse our JWT secret key. So here's going to be JWT underscore secret, and here we're going to have rec.user equals to decoded, because what is going to be gotten from the decoded is the user ID, and it's going to contain the user data, like maybe their email, name, and so on, and whatever other data that we're trying to parse. And then now we're going to have next right here to allow the request to continue. Okay, so this is all about our middleware. Next, we'll have to catch any potential errors that arises when launching this. So here we're going to have return res.status 401, and then here JSON, and then inside here we're going to have message, and we will say invalid or expired token. So if the token is invalid or expired, the user will probably have to log in one more time. Okay, so now next we have to export it. So we have module.export, and then equals auth. Okay, and then the next final thing we're going to do is to define the user.js, and we're going to define, and then we're going to create a very specific route that is specific to the user who is getting logged in. And this route that we're going to specify, we'll just call it something like /me, and the route is going to let a login user fetch their own profile, so things like their user ID, their name, their email, without needing to manually send their user ID. So the server will basically figure out who you are just from the JWT web token. Okay, so what we're going to start doing right here is we're going to initialize express. So here we're going to say require, and then here we're going to have express, and then next we're going to have our user. So we're going to say here require, and then here we want to have models, and then user, and then next we're going to have const auth, and then here require. Same thing, we have to go to our folder of our auth, so middleware, and then auth. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is to create a router. So we're going to say const equals router or express.router, and then the next thing we're going to do is to create our route. So we're going to say router here dot get, and the get request is just so that we can get the actual data when the user is trying to log in. Okay, so here we're going to parse in the auth, and we'll create our async function right here, and as usual we're going to parse the rec and res, and inside here we're going to have our try block, and then we are going to start by verifying the user. So we're going to say const user await user dot find by ID, because remember, once we are going to verify the JWT token, it's going to decode it and return a user ID. So we're going to say here rec.user.id, and then if not user, we want to basically return res.status and set the code as 404, so 404 not found if the user doesn't exist. So JSON, we're going to say here message user not found. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is return res.json, and here now we're going to have user, so we're going to basically be returning the user will have the ID here, user dot underscore ID comma name, user dot name, and then email, user dot email. And yeah, that's it. We don't need to return the password for obvious reasons. And then now we can catch any error that occurs. So here we're going to have catch error, and then here return res.status 500, and then now .json, because we want to enter the message, or we want to display a message. So here we're going to have server error. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is to export our router. So we'll have module.export equals router. Okay, So we are all set here. So now the very final thing we'll have to do inside our code is very basic. Now we have to basically hook up every single thing inside our server.js. Because remember, right now we have defined everything correctly, but we are booting up from the server.js. And there is no way for a server.js to basically interact with all these files. So we have to call everything inside the server.js correctly. So firstly, we are going to start by initializing our different routes. So here we're going to have const auth routes. So here let's say here auth routes will require routes and then /auth for the auth routes, and then let's just copy and paste this here for our user routes. So here is going to be user routes, and then here routes we will have here user. Okay, let's make sure everything is correct. All right, user, perfect. Okay, so now what we want to do now is to use this auth route and to use this route, and we are going to use it and define the exact route or the exact path that we have to do to access those routes. So just below this right here, we're going to specify app.use, and then we're going to say here /API/auth, and then now auth routes. So inside our URL, at the end of our URL, when we enter /API/auth, we'll be able to enter or access the register route and the login route thanks to this. And then next, we have to also specify accessing the route from our user. So this just means that if you specify any other route inside either of these, you can access it directly here without having to manually type in the route inside your server.js. So here we're going to have /API here, /user, and then we're going to have user route. Okay, so we are all set. Now this is basically everything. Now it's time to test our different routes if everything is working fine. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to open up Postman. Now let's go ahead and maximize Postman. So the first thing we're going to do here, let's first check if everything is working fine. Let's see. Okay, do we have our port running right here? Do we have our server running? Okay, we are connected to MongoDB. Server is running on port 5050. All right, so let's head over to Postman. We have localhost here. I'm just going to cancel this. The first thing we are going to do is we are going to create a new user. Before we create a new user, let's just open up MongoDB and let's head over to our database. So let's go to Data Explorer. We are going to come here and connect to our cluster. So connecting, okay, and then let's come here to test. Let's come here to users. So we see that we don't have any users right here. Okay, so we have absolutely no users. So now let's go ahead and create a new user. So here we're going to have API/auth/register. Okay, now inside the body, this was something I was testing, so I'll just go ahead and create a new one. Let's say ato@gmail.com, and then I'll leave this password, and then we also have to specify a name. So here we're going to say name, and the name here is going to be ato, and let's add a comma. Okay, so this our body, this is basically what is going to be parsed to our API. Okay, so remember, once you come over to Postman, you can come here and create, let's even just do it together. Let's create new, and then we go to HTTP. Okay, we have a blank slate right now, nothing pre-entered. And then what we want to do is to create a new user. So we're going to say HTTP localhost. I already have it right here, but let's just type it together. HTTP localhost 5050, and then here we're going to have API/auth/register. And this is a post request because we are trying to create a new user. So we'll have to send some data. So we cannot use get because we have to send some data over the API. Okay, let me maximize everything and try to, okay, so it can be clearer for everybody. Okay, so now next, inside this body here, we're going to parse a JSON. So here we're going to have name, and then here we're going to have ATO, and then we're going to have email, and inside this email here, or sorry, after the email, we can add the email. We can say ato@yahoo.com, and then for the password, we'll have here password. Okay, password 123. So now let's send. Let's send and see if everything's working. Okay, everything's working fine. So as we specified in our code, once we create a new user, a token is being created, and this token can now be used to automatically log in the user into their account, and we can save the token inside the session storage. So if the user closes the page and comes back, they don't need to create their account, or they don't need to enter their details one more time, and then it returns this user ID, name, email, so that whatever thing we want to do in our front end, or whatever thing we want to do with the data, we can do it from this JSON right here. So it returns the ID, name, email, except the password as we specified inside our code. Now let's head over to MongoDB, and let's refresh the page and see if our data has been created inside the database. Okay, so here it is right now. So we have the ID, the name, ATO, email, and can you see the password? The password is absolutely not what I entered. Remember, I entered password 123, right? But what we have here is a very strange character, okay? Because this is the character, this is the password that has been hashed. It means that nobody, even the person owning the database, cannot access anybody's password, okay? And now, thanks to the timestamp that we included inside our MongoDB schema, we have the created at and the updated at, okay? So now the next route we want to test, or the next route we want to access, is our login route. So we want to log into the user's account. So we can come here and type login. We don't need the name to log in, but even if you log in with the name, it's still going to work. And then let's check it right here. Let's log in. So we send, you see that it creates a new token when you log in. Each time you log in, it's always going to create a new token. So if we log in again, it creates a brand new token. And now the next thing we are going to do is to try to automatically verify this token and return the user's data, so that when the user returns to the website, they don't need to automatically log in. We store this token inside the session storage, and we can automatically access it and retrieve their data. So I'll go ahead here and copy it. So Control-C, I've already pressed it. So now what we're going to do here is we are going to come here and press get. So what we want to do here is to say API/user/me. So the first thing I'm going to do is to try to first send it without the token, okay? So without the token, we get invalid or expired token, which is absolutely what we are waiting for, or what we require. Now the next thing, since we want to put in this token and still get the user's data without the user needing to enter their login details, we come over to the auth type here, bearer token, and then we are going to paste the token that I just entered. So come here, you paste it, and then you click on send. We're getting, okay, so we're getting invalid token. So let me just go back here and make sure we are getting the correct token. Okay, so I think, okay, it was supposed to be get. So let's send again. Okay, so we're probably having a wrong token. So let me debug this and come back. Okay, so the error we're getting right here is a very simple error. It was a small typo here. So we have start with. So I instead enter start with lowercase instead of uppercase. So remember, don't make this error as I did. So let's go ahead and test it one more time. So we still have the token we copied. So if we send it right now, now we get the user. Now it means that we have actually gotten the user details that we got after logging in and after register, just by using the unique token, okay? So now just think about it in a real world scenario. So if it's that a user comes onto his website or onto your website and they already logged in before, what you do is that the first time they log in, you store that token inside the session storage, so that the next time they open your website, instead of them having to log in again, you just basically verify the token and log them in and basically populate whatever data you need to populate. Okay, so this is basically it about our tutorial. So other little things that you can do just for fun, just to verify if all your error messages are working. If you come over to the post, you're supposed to get an error. If you come over to the post right here and then you go to auth and then login, and you don't enter any JSON in order to parse data, it's going to say email and password required. Remember what we added there. So if you add also an email without a password and you want to log in, it should also say email and password required. Same thing with the register. Okay, and then now if we check out the login and there is no, or the password is wrong, let's say password here, pass123, we get invalid credentials. Okay, so this is basically all about this tutorial. So by now you should already know how to create routes in Express. You should already know how to connect it to MongoDB and basically create new users, return the appropriate JSON so you can use it in your front end. All right, now I want to congratulate you for getting to the end of this video because most people don't actually finish tutorials. So I hope you have learned something, and now I hope you have real auth working out for you. And know that this is not only for you to know how auth works, this is for you to practice backend concepts and very commonly used backend concepts in general. So by now you can register, log in, get a token, and hit a protected route with middleware. And that's the core pattern behind most APIs. Now the next thing you can do to further practice and further learn, you can add one more protected route into your own project. So it can be something like posts, order, or dashboard, and make sure it only works when the token is present. So this is how you really practice. So after following this tutorial, make sure to extend this project more to actually practice by yourself, because when you actually sit down to do something new, which is a little bit different from the tutorial, that is when you learn, because you get stuck a little bit, do some research, ask questions, and those findings is what will make you to actually learn and understand the concepts. So if you want more backend lessons like this, or if you want also extend this tutorial even further and do things like refresh tokens, roles, and even more production ready setup, comment auth2 in the comments and I'll be sure to make it and drop it. So let me know if you like this video, like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.